welcome to our webinar organized by the Innovation in Law Studies Alliance. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm quite sure that we have people from all over the world because this is becoming a nice forum where we mix professionals of law, we meet students, we mix teachers, professors, deans, and we all debate, reflect, and get to conclusions regarding issues that are worrying all of us. So today we have this fantastic topic, coding, not coding, that's the question. And we are super lucky to have with us people from around the world. This time is a little bit American, but it doesn't matter because I think that they are very advanced in this matter. So I think they will give us a very good idea of what is going on and what should be happening in other countries where things are going a little bit more slower. In the case of Eric, he's coming from Holland. Hoe gaat het, Eric? Welcome. You're mute. Okay. And as always, I want to start with a brief presentation on the webinar, and secondly on our speakers. So let me share my screen with you. 1 second. This time I hope you can see it perfectly. Okay. And there we go. Okay. Okay, so coding, should lawyers know how to program or not? And if so, what and how can we better teach them to do it? Oh, sorry, this went wrong again. Today is not really my day, but let's go back here. Okay, how is going this webinar to be structured? 3 parts. The first part will be this introduction on the topic, on the Innovation in Law Studies Alliance, and on the they will introduce themselves. Second, we will have the panelists intervention with then splitting the time in around slots of around 3 minutes. So there will be like sort of 36 minutes, and they will try to answer the 3 questions that we have asked them to answer. And finally, we will open as every time the microphone for you, for the audience, and you will put your videos on as well and share your point of view or ask things to the panelists. For that we have around 40 minutes, but of course, if you need to do something else, you can leave us before that time. About us, the Innovation in Law Studies Alliance, I think most of you know us already. We are a group of universities, and what we are trying to do is work together in order to innovate and become more global with our mutual support. How do we do that? With discussions like this one, but also with meetings. We will have a global meeting in the month of November, a sort of congress on probably on legal education and other fields of interest to our members. And we are doing all the kind of activities. Today, I hope I have in the audience Argiro. She represents Greenwich University, and she's the director of their lab. Let's Lab is called, and she's going to explain a project that she has proposed ILSA to be part of, which is a hackathon on digital rights. So in a second, I will be giving Argiro the possibility of explaining that to us. It will be 3 minutes, and she will have the room for her for 1 moment. Regarding ILSA, I don't want to go deep into this, but we do a lot of nice things, and I think that this is becoming something important. And because the members are already proposing activities to the Alliance, so that other members participate and can take profit of it. So we do innovation, we collaborate, we exchange best practices, we have this global scope, and we promote entrepreneurship and also this interdisciplinary approach, social responsibility. We are completely people-centric and we love technology. So these are our pillars. And just for you to remember, every month we have one of these webinars. The coming one will be on the 9th of June, and we're going to discuss how to encourage academic research in the fields of innovation in legal tech. If you want to know more about the webinars, the website has all of them, so you can just check them there and register in our newsletter so that you are warned in advance and you can join us every month. And let me first, Hiro, are you there? I'm not sure whether she has been able to join because we spoke yesterday. Hiro, are you there? No? Okay, so maybe she hasn't been able to join. Then I will tell you briefly what we are doing. We are organizing a hackathon. Is going to be a hackathon in the month of July, the weekend of the, I think it's 8, 9, and 10. Sorry, I don't have the data because she was going to explain this to you, but is that weekend. And it's going to be called DG Hackathon, and it's going to deal with digital rights for smart cities. So we want the participants to deploy tools to help citizens better understand their rights and be able to exercise them effectively when necessary. So that's the idea, and we will send you all more information about the hackathon. You are invited to participate, maybe to be facilitator. We want to have some people helping the teams that participate, and we want 100 people participating. So please just remember this. We will send you more information about it. And now, let me introduce you to our fantastic speakers. They are here, and I would like them to present themselves. So David, Janet, Damian, and Eric, would you mind telling us a little bit about you, please?
Certainly. My name is David Colarusso. I'm the director of the Legal Innovation and Technology Lab at Suffolk University Law School in Boston, in the States. And I think I'm also here because I teach a class called Coding the Law. So you might be able to guess where I'm going to fall down.
Thank you so much, David. Janet.
My name is Jeanette Ikes. I am a research professor of law at Vermont Law School, where I direct the Center for Legal Innovation. I have, in a previous life, I was a computer science professor. And so I have spent a lot of time talking to my students about how coding can help them better understand the law. So you can see where I'm going to go with this.
Thank you. Damian, please.
I'm Damian Reel. I've been a lawyer since 2002, but been a coder since 1985. I keep those both at equal par. I litigated as a lawyer for about 15 years. I left that to join Thomson Reuters, building software for one of the biggest legal tech companies in the world. Left that to do cybersecurity, where my biggest engagement was Facebook hired me to investigate Cambridge Analytica, figuring out how Facebook was using, how people are using Facebook data in ways they shouldn't. I left that for my current job, where I'm working with Fastcase, using natural language processing and other methods to be able to extract things from our 500 million legal documents, lawyer file documents, and court documents to be able to figure out what the DNA of the law is to compute it. And so, again, you can probably guess where I fall down with David and Jeanette on coding for lawyers.
Eric, please.
You're muted, Eric.
Eric.
Always the same mistake. Welcome. I'm Eric Biersma. I'm a lecturer in the University of Rotterdam, the University of Applied Sciences, and I'm also teaching some courses within that. And I'm not a lawyer, but I'm a sociologist, but I'm teaching such things as conflict analysis, public administration, but also innovation in law. And we're more or less focusing on more incorporate things of legal design, legal technology within our curriculum, because we train and educate more paralegals. So not people who will become a lawyer, but more paralegals who can work with governments or other agencies. So I'm very interested in innovation within the law field in the Netherlands.
Well, thank you so much. It's fascinating to have you all here with these fantastic and enriching profiles, because we normally hear lawyers only, and having you, a sociologist, a computer science expert, another computer science expert, and a lawyer with a computer science experience as well is really amazing. So thank you all, and let's jump now already into our questions. So question number 1, to what extent should a legal professional acquire programming skills?
So I think so first, another bit of background. I am a licensed attorney, and I was a public defender for some time. I had a small software firm for that, so I sort of fit in both those. So as to the question of sort of to what extent should lawyers learn the code, I think that one of the things we need to sort of clarify is, what do we mean by lawyers, and what do we mean by code, right? So do we mean all lawyers? Do we mean everyone in the legal profession, paraprofessionals, et cetera? And then do we mean coding? Is coding writing a formula in an Excel spreadsheet? Is coding using one of these sort of light or no code document automation systems? Or does coding have to be, writing something in Python or Pascal or whatnot? So just throw that out there in response to the very first question, which is, to what extent should a legal professional acquire programming skills? I think it depends upon, right? It's a classic lawyer answer. It depends. So it depends upon what their goals are. And those skills are going to be different based upon those. I think that unquestionably, if you say that some attorneys should learn to do some coding, that's going to be an easy yes. The question is figuring out the broad outlines of that. So what I like to use as a guide stone for to what extent is that they should learn enough. The sort of metaphor I've used before is, it's sort of being conversant in a language that's not your first language, such that you can get the things you need to be done. So the idea is you should know enough to be able to understand the realm of the possible, so know what's possible, and able to call BS when someone's trying to sell you something that isn't true, and then work as part of interdisciplinary teams to actually get interesting things done. Because I don't think we want to train attorneys to be programmers, and in the sense that they're not going to, leave their job and go create a bunch of software products. But we want them to be able to work with programmers to create things and to know where to take things and to serve their clients when they see the implications that software has on their lives. So that'll be my short bit.
So I will pick up after you, David. I would agree with everything you've said. I think I would focus in on the importance of lawyers understanding, and as far as legal education is concerned, what budding young lawyers can learn from the process of coding. There is a lot of analysis in coding that is reflected in what we do in the law. And I would add that I think there's a huge benefit to law students to learn to think through code, because I think it can be echoed in the thought processes they use when they learn to analyze the law. Having said that, I completely agree with David that we do not want developers out there that are lawyer developers. However, I would argue that I think times are changing. I think the next generation of students we educate will have some programming when they get to us, because it's going to be part of information literacy in the future, much like learning a second language or a third language is. So I don't know that we'll be having this conversation in 10 years or 15 years, because I think the landscape will have changed. And no one will fight us on this. I had the most interesting experience with a student from Puerto Rico this year who did a coding project with us. And when he heard other students, American students, pushing back, US students, he said, "Don't you learn this in high school?" And that's what generated this new train of thought for me, that it's going to be ubiquitous. I think preparing today's students gives them a leg up and will let them sort of not be left in the dust by their peers when they graduate.
I have a feeling we're going to be agreeing with each other a lot. So I agree with all the things that David and Jeanette just said. Things I would add is a formative thing in my journey with coding and lawyering was Lawrence Lessig's Law as Code, Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace, I think is his book that he wrote. But it really informed me that legal code is really just another form of code, and legal code can be expressed in computer code. And so at least the grand theory in the late 1990s when he wrote his book was that we could maybe write legal code in computer code, and then the world would just work so seamlessly because we would just emit all of this XML that would then be computed and life would be grand. And here we are 20 years later, that grand vision has not yet happened. But I think the idea is still there, is that the law is logical. The law is code. And so to express it in code, it makes a lot of sense. In fact, I had a contracts professor. I went to law school in the late 1990s, early 2000s, and she required us to, for every statute, to write them in if, then, else statements. If this happens, then that happens, and then else this other thing. She had no idea about computer science, but she knew this was a logical way to express statutes. So anyway, so what is, she said write it in language, English, but what is language but another code? So this is getting back to David's question, what is code? Is expressing if, then, else in English coding? Is that, perhaps it is, right? Is it then converting that if, then, else in English to computer code? Is that coding? That's looking more like code. If you express it maybe in an Excel spreadsheet, that's probably also code. But the important thing is to analyze the if, then, else in any language, whether that's English or Pascal or JavaScript. And so once you start thinking in that logical way, and lawyers are logical after all, if nothing else, then you're able to then better, even if you're not writing production code, you're still able to work with other people's code and other software and be able to be more facile in thinking through how software can help you do your work, even if you're not writing production code. And in that way, you're able to better spot the really good software that you can use to be able to make your practice better and separate that from the snake oil that people are trying to sell you, that you realize, since you have a little idea how code works, is like, I don't think that can do what you think you can do. So in any ways, that I don't think lawyers are going to be writing production code, but they should at least know the logic behind it.
And unfortunately, I will agree with the previous speakers. A lot of valuable things have been said, so I agree with it. From my point of view, I think code is more part of a more broader context. I would like to see it in a broader context also for our students. We say within our education, we say it's more or less part of your 21st century skills, that you're able to be critical, is able to be used the things that are there, and then you have to be learning to program or something, but you will have to make use of different tools that are available within the market or within the practice. And there's also important thing that we also want to learn some ethical aspects according to using of programs or software, because now maybe you've noticed, but we had a big affair in the Netherlands about the tax office, which made some big mistakes in applying the law. So we want to prevent that kind of thing, so that professionals we educate will be a sort of ethical sense of professionalism in how to use with coding and how to use algorithms. This is much more broader, but it's not all neutral. Sometimes there are some prejudices in the use of algorithms. So I think it's very important to apply the broader context of applying coding, applying algorithms, and applying legal technology as a whole. So that's what I want to address to this question.
Thank you so much. And let's jump into the second question. How can universities introduce coding for lawyers training in law degrees? If you all agree that this is going to be like the ABC, so they're supposed to know. Maybe the students come from the school already knowing it, but in case it doesn't happen and they have to learn to code at the university, when should it happen? How should it happen? How do you teach coding at the moment at your universities?
So I think that if we sort of stick with the how should we introduce, sort of like before getting to the what we're specifically doing at our universities. I think there are a lot of different models, and this is something people are still finding out. And I think that there's an important thing at this stage of the game to think about is not just what would be the ideal means of teaching it to students, but what is the, and I think for this audience, this is very much on point, what would be the means by which, sort of what's your theory of change to move from the world we are in now, where it's this sort of not so wacky idea, but eventually, in 10 years, it's going to be, accepted. So the question is, how do you get from here to there? And I think a lot of what you've seen is the establishment of sort of beachheads within universities, where you have maybe a class like my class, that's a coding the law class that attempts to get people's hands dirty, do some stuff, but then also address some of what Eric was talking about, some of the broader contextual issues. By understanding how things like machine learning works, we can understand how bias creeps into those tools. So we can start to be able to challenge those things as we might have to in the future world on behalf of our clients. And we can start thinking about how that would have implications if we were to use these tools ourselves. So having some theory of change, I think, is important. A lot of places, I think, tend to start with like the single class, maybe by an adjunct professor or a part-time staff. I think really if you really want to sort of make inroads, you really need to have real resources, and you should work interdisciplinarily. So what we do at our university, we have a lab class, and we have law students, but we also have team members who are undergraduate students in computer science and members of our business school. And so recognizing that those cross-disciplinary teams are the teams you're going to meet in your professional life, and acknowledging that with some type of experiential learning is definitely the way I feel about going back. Not to say that you shouldn't have theory and other things, but I think if we're talking about the theory of change, that getting people's hands dirty, getting them to understand things by doing is key. And what's nice about code is you can do that very easily. So you can choose tools that meet people where they're at. So I just shared in the chat Q&A markup, which is a simple little tool for turning basically flowcharts into interactive interviews. And we can do an exercise in one class where we take a memo or a statute and we break it down into if-then statements and then produce a little interactive flowchart effectively that can walk someone through navigating the reasoning behind that. And as Jeanette talked about earlier, there's nothing, you don't learn anything better than when you teach it. So imagine how well you'll learn it when you teach it to a computer, right? Because they're very, very picky. And so, yeah, you can start small, but start interdisciplinary and start where people are at, meet them with tools. You don't have to jump in with teaching everyone Python, although you might by the end of a class get some people in that direction.
Thank you. Janet?
I spend a lot of time in my classes. I just jump in and teach it. So I don't apologize for it. I say this is logic. This is how it works. I've infused my courses with mind maps and flowcharts, so they're already leaning in that direction from a thinking perspective, and it really helps them understand the connection. Students come back to me and say, why didn't anybody tell us about this in my first year of law school? This would have enhanced my learning of core legal principles. So having had that experience, what we're doing now is what I call course inserts. David's heard me talk about this before, but this notion that we go into a contracts course, into a Civ Pro course, into a torts course, and we say, this is how programming or writing business rules would help you if you were an attorney in this setting. I think across the spectrum, we're seeing code creep in, particularly in that place where people are creating business rules, which is really not much different than SQL. And as they move in that direction across all businesses, lawyers are going to have to do it. So teaching them early on in that first year of law school how to make those transitions in thinking and how to think about their contract computationally when they write it is just terribly useful. So the inserts I was talking about, smart contracts into a contracts course. What does that mean? How do they work? Right. So you start flavoring the standard curriculum with these courses. So that's really what I've been doing to try. I have a dream that LegReg is taught, legislative and regulatory law is taught through coding lens. I think that matches up pretty squarely with the notion of code is law, which is what Damien was talking about, that was Lessig's concept. And I think can really enhance the legal learning at the same time they're learning how to apply code in that circumstance.
Thank you.
That's great. And acknowledging the chat, people, it looks like David has a fanboy as far as somebody who's really a fan of Q&A. So anyone who has not checked out the chat, Q&A markup is really a phenomenal tool to be able to help teach the concepts that Jeanette and David and Eric are talking about. So please look in the chat for that. And to the question of how should we teach coding for lawyers? As somebody who litigated for 15 years, of course, I'm kind of end focused. That is, to what end are we teaching coding? And I think that the end that we should seek is to make practicing lawyers that know more about the technology that surrounds them every day. It surrounds them in their personal lives and their professional lives. A very formative book for me while I was litigating, like I said, I litigated for 15 years, and Richard Susskind wrote a book called Tomorrow's Lawyers that I read while I was a lawyer. And he created at least an idea that was new-ish to me, that tomorrow's lawyers are going to be really focused on being able to convert legal code to computer code. Even if they're not actually writing the code themselves, they're going to play parts in be able to help the code work. So I would say that to what end? I would say for law firms to help lawyers better practice law, for judges to be able to better interpret cases that relate to their that technology, and also to be able to maybe have technology help the work of judges. I personally worked for 2 judges before I worked at a law firm, and it is amazing how much they have to be able to sift through and be able to consider. So computers can help with that. And then the third is for the students to be able to help with legal technology. We need better tools to be able to make lawyers' lives easier. And as somebody who works in legal technology today, I every day really focus on the cross-disciplinary aspect that David had mentioned, and I think Jeanette too. And you know, my dad is a carpenter, and he always said, always use the best tool for the job. And so when you think about who is the best worker for the job, and I work in legal tech, so my best use in legal tech is to be able to work side by side with the coders who have master's degrees in coding. My best use is to be able to say, well, the law actually works this way. And so we need to be able to use this variable and have this exception to the rule. And I use language that really makes sense to the coders. And then from there, once that handoff happens, that my subject matter expertise could get handed off to the coders, they can do things with code that I couldn't imagine doing, because they have master's degrees in coding, right? But they don't have law degrees. But I know enough about coding to be able to speak their language. And as a result of that knowledge transfer, they now know just a little bit about the law to be able to help their coding work a little bit better. So at any rate, so that collaborative and interdisciplinary aspect that David and Jeanette had talked about, I think is the really important thing. And I think is the key takeaway is teach your students enough to be dangerous. Teach them enough to know just basically how code works, so that they can then translate that to the professional coders who can essentially be a force maximizer to 2x or 3x or 10x your efforts on the coding side.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now I can address to that again. I agree with most of what we said before because of the lawyers. I will focus some more on the paralegals, which is the students we are educating, and I'm also trying to give. And I start my college always say, think like a lawyer, but don't act like one. It's a Dutch book with an English title. And that's what I mean is not to offend you as a lawyer, of course, but more
I love it. It is beautiful.
It is.
That not always every problem should have a legal solution. So that's certainly for law students, it's also a sort of a mind-blowing thing. But I think that's important to know that. And also there's a nice quote also from an American, and I hope you recognize the American who quoted this. Sometimes the second best option leads to the best result. Now, which famous American had been saying this? He's not here anymore, but he was a famous chess player. And what was the most famous American chess player in the history? Wow, Damien,
Armstrong?
David. Bobby Fischer.
Oh,
Okay.
Of course.
Yeah, but I just announced that we also want to address this kind of thing with our students, because it's important that they get a sort of a broad mindset, and that they know that I not only think as a legal thing, but also with a more broader prospects. And it's also about coding. Coding, you should apply coding sometime, but you see more than alone the coding thing, but also the ethical aspects, but also the more broader perspectives. Because most of our paralegals, they come to work with governments, municipalities, legal assistance, and then you don't every time you need a legal solution for something, because legal might also be a conflict game between lawyers, which is not always the best outcome for simple citizens. So that's what I want to address in addition to what you've been saying, my dear colleagues from America.
After hearing you, I was just thinking, do you think that the telecom universities or the computer science universities are having debates like this one regarding law? Are they thinking, should software developers learn about law? Or is that an issue for them? Because for us, it's clearly an issue. I mean, most of us, I think if we make a poll now, most of us think, okay, I should be doing this. Once something different is, shall I do it? Because I think that fear, time, many reasons make us not doing it. But are they also thinking the same? Should they also be thinking the same? What do you think?
I have a thought, and maybe I'll go out of order. Apologies, but I think that my experience working, I've worked with a lot of Silicon Valley technologists, and I've also worked with a lot of lawyers to try to tackle this problem. And at least in my experience, the technologists seem to be overconfident in being able to tackle legal problems, and the lawyers are underconfident in thinking that technology can solve their problems. And so the technologists think, well, law is code, so we can. They're kind of taking. I hesitate to say naive, but the kind of the Lawrence Lessig, we could just convert the code and it's fine. But after any technologist that I know that has actually worked in this space has realized, oh, there's lots of nuances, there's lots of elses that I have to build into the code that make life a lot harder. And then on the legal side, of course, each lawyer thinks that the particular matter that they're working on is a beautiful snowflake that cannot be replicated in any way. And there's no way a computer can actually do the things that my beautiful brain has been able to create. So they are underconfident in being able to maximize things. So of course, we need to meet in the middle where it's not easy, but technology and lawyers should be able to build cool things like David and Jeanette and Eric and their teams.
I would throw in here, maybe we'll reverse the order a bit. I would throw in that I think the problem is when you put a coder in the room and a developer in the room and a lawyer in the room, they both think they're the smartest person in the room with all the answers. And I think that's a problem. They don't listen to each other. So maybe the skills that need to happen here start with something as simple as learning how to inquire and listen, and build knowledge in an area that may not be your first choice. And I think there's a lot of really just fundamental skills and cross-disciplinary work that have to happen there, that fall really outside of should coders be learning law? Yes, and they should be learning how to write in whatever language their native language is well, and they should be able to explain their concepts to the average person, just like lawyers. And there's a lot of similarities in what I would think of as soft skills that all the professions kind of lack, in some level. So I would actually start in a more fundamental place and say we all need to have some common ground that we can work from. Otherwise, we're looking at a Tower of Babel kind of thing.
That is one of the interesting things that happens with my students when we work in teams. For some of them, it's the first time the law students are being asked in an academic environment to work as part of a team, because they're sort of socialized to compete against their fellow students within their other classes. So that I think that's a really good point. And I was trying to find here, there was a recent article in the Communications of the Association for Computing Machinery, which was, I couldn't quite find it, but it was talking about exactly your question, which is, should computer scientists be thinking more about the law? And so I do think there are those conversations, especially as they're thinking about the implications, as Eric has brought up, around sort of broader social issues and how the tools people make will be used. And so understanding that from a legal standpoint is really something that's important. And we haven't even gotten into the EU rules, proposed rules on AI yet. So, you know, we can, so there we go.
Thank you.
I also think it's important that some because you got a lot of in the Netherlands, and I'm sure it will be the same in other countries. You get a lot of wicked problems, so to say. So for to address wicked problems, you need multiple perspectives, and you don't go to get along with just your legal perspective. So it's also important to learn our students that the law is one thing, but it is more than that. You also got other things, social science, communication skills, etc. So it's not enough to learn students only a legal point of view, especially when it deals to societal wicked problems, which there are a lot. I can mention a lot, of course.
And I want to agree with Eric, and I want to emphasize a bit of what Jeanette said, that she said something really smart, that every technologist and lawyer think that they are the smartest person in the room. And I think that that results in both the rigorous education that's required for both skills, and also the algorithmic process that both go through. Lawyers are taught to be able to quickly analyze, issue spot, and then come to a conclusion. And then once you reach that conclusion, litigate it to your death. Right, defend that position. And I think that computer scientists and technologists also run their algorithm to be able to think through all the possibilities, and then they think, okay, this is the right solution. So when you get two of those kind of butting heads, that's very difficult. And that's something that I, as a litigator for 15 years, had to unlearn as I worked in legal technology. And I've learned to say, rather than early in my legal technology career, I would litigate to the death. Now I think I've become a bit smarter, at least I hope I've become a bit smarter, where if someone comes with something that I may disagree with, I often say, yes, that's option one. We could do this. There are pitfalls with that because there's this thing and this thing and this thing, but that's definitely option one. Option two could be doing it this way, and then here's the benefits of doing it that way, and here's some pitfalls that might happen there. Let's work through whether option one or option two is maybe the best way. That takes a bit of humility from the speaker to not do that, but I think, and lawyers and maybe technologists lack humility a bit, but I think that by approaching it this way, option one or option two, let's work through the best solution, I think ultimately gets the best software, and essentially that goes from the waterfall thinking more to the agile thinking. Let's think option one and option two and iteratively get to the right solution.
And I would add to that it's not just option one and option two. There's a whole series of things in between, and oftentimes they're a combination. And we have to let go of our hubris enough to be willing to acknowledge that somebody else's solution has points we should have thought of and included, and vice versa, right?
We also experiment with design thinking to let students know about design thinking. So there's no fixed solution. So I have to, and it's a different way of looking to a problem. Normally they're framed to do analytical things. It's analytical study, the law especially. But then it's a different mindset to look at another way to a problem, with no fixed outcome. And then sometimes you get some solution which you shouldn't have thought before. So that's a different way of thinking, which should be part of, I think, should be part of the curriculum, that you can say, well, what kind of thinking do I need in this particular case? And not always the analytical thinking is good. It is not a question of good or wrong, but which kind of thinking is the best appropriate for this kind of problem. So then you're more flexible to address the problems you're facing if you're working with civilians or working with people in trouble.
So it seems that before learning to code, we, both developers and lawyers, we need to learn to speak to each other, to speak the same language. And maybe design thinking can help us. No, this could be the conclusion to this question. And let's jump into the final one. So tell us, please, how is your university training students in programming, in the case of the ones who are at the university? And maybe, Damien, you can tell us a bit about how did you learn to program and how do you learn about law? How do you did this jump into one career and the other? So who wants to start now? Janet, do you want to start telling us about your university and what you're doing? And then David,
Sure.
maybe, and then Eric, and then finally Damien? Okay.
Sure. I have long been at least trying to teach some level of coding, sometimes with limited success, sometimes with more success. And because David would perish if I didn't tell this story, I started out in law school in the mid 90s. And when I was writing, I kept getting a lot of ink spilled on my appellate briefs, and the ink I was getting spilled on them had to do with whether or not I blue booked correctly. And can I tell you how frustrating it is to lose a whole letter grade because you didn't put commas in the right place? Not your legal argument, because of some stupid commas that somebody put and they're going to change next year, right? So I wrote a Perl script using regular expressions to do my blue booking for me. I actually, because I wrote this, learned blue booking better, because the pattern recognition you have to do to make this happen really teaches you the law. That was my aha moment, right? I had to learn how to blue book, and I shouldn't have said teaches you the law. It should have teaches you how to do citations properly, because frankly, there's no brilliance to that. It's about detail working and care. And I then was on a mission to demonstrate to others in my class and other law students, as I developed into both a computer science and a law professor, that this has got to be a better way to do this. We don't need to do the grunt work. We don't need to do the drudgery. Let's allow lawyers to be the creative thinkers. So when I present this to my students, I present it as a tool to let them do more of what they enjoy and less of the drudgery. And it creates efficiency. That's useful. It gives them a competitive edge as a lawyer. That's useful. So when I teach coding, I first go through a process, and David nailed it when he said adoption. You've got to really get people moving to think about it as a positive in their life and in their career path. And once you do that, they suddenly are really excited to learn. I use a no-code, low-code solution, Afterpattern. It works great to teach them the basic logical flow and thinking behind building apps and doing document automation, and building expert systems. That's the level I want them to see. But I would tell you that for my cybersecurity law course, and this is outside of coding a bit, I teach them about the OSI layers and networks, because I think it's important to understand the basics of how networks function to understand how cybersecurity works. You cannot think about a cause of action unless you understand the underlying pieces that go to proving the elements of any cause, right? And so David was talking about this earlier with algorithms and finding bias, and I think that's an absolutely excellent point as well. You've got to understand how to unpack all of these things. David referred to it kindly, and I refer to it as you develop a BS meter. And that's what we all learn in this coding. So I'm teaching them all of the reasons to code at the same time I teach them to code, because I think through that lens comes willingness, which I wouldn't have otherwise. Because their first response is, I want to become a lawyer because I'm bad at math, right? And I don't have a lot of patience for that. And I think I tell them, well, you're a smart person, so you can learn to do this, right? And that's my right response. So, David, hopefully I didn't steal too much of your piece there.
No, I'm glad you got the. I would have been very disappointed if I hadn't heard the regular expressions story. But yeah, sort of to the question of how we're teaching coding at Suffolk. So we have a legal innovation and technology concentration. And so we have a bunch of different courses that focus on different things. I would actually make the argument, sort of previewed the idea earlier, that actually coding is sort of a spectrum, and that really coding is telling a computer how to do something. And so that there's a spectrum of that. And so I would argue that actually a bunch of our courses do that, whether or not it's using the tools you already have, or getting more using more sophisticated tools, you sort of go into the deep end of programming. But what I tend to do is I teach a class called Coding the Law. I'll drop a link in the chat. One of the consequences of remote teaching this last year means that all of my resources and all of my lectures, so it's everything from the class except for our class discussions. So you can find all of that there if that's something that interests you. And it links out to a bunch of tools like the ones Jeanette was mentioning, and I dropped some of those in the chat too. But generally the idea is it's sort of a survey course that takes its guide star from the notion that you never learn something. There's a quote by the physicist Richard Feynman, something to the effect of, "That which I can't create, I don't understand." And the notion is, just as Jeanette was saying, like you need to know how some things work to understand the implications. We want our students to get their hands dirty, to build things such that they can then know how to work with those things. Even if they're never going to, sit down and do a bunch of programming in the future, knowing how to do something and knowing the realm of the possible is amazing. I'll tell just one little illustrative story. One of my students, and similar stories happen every year. I had a student from one of my classes who was interning with a law firm, and they had gotten over some large amount of discovery, but they were a small boutique firm, so not a big law firm. And they were trying to figure out how they were going to deal with some of this discovery. And key to it was a set of spreadsheets. And it was such that there was information on one spreadsheet that was related to information on another spreadsheet, but they couldn't figure out how to put them together. And he was able just to basically do a join on the sheets using a common key, and he was a magician. They of course offered him a job. He ended up taking a better job, but just understanding what your existing tools can do and how you can ask machines to quote unquote think or to do some process, being able to explain a set of steps to a computer is a valuable thing, even in that low end. And then at a higher end, really understanding the realm of the possible is extraordinarily important. So the way we do it is we do little projects. So we'll do a project with different sets of tools, not because we're trying to teach those tools, but we're trying to teach the concepts. So we'll do stuff with document automation. We'll do stuff with expert systems. Those are very closely related. We tend to use a lot of open source tools because we think there's a lot of value there. In fact, we ran a COVID-19 response out of our lab last summer where we helped build a bunch of guided interviews that help people file things with the court so that they didn't actually have to physically go to the court when the courts were physically closed, despite the fact the courts were still hearing emergency matters. And we did that as a volunteer effort. We had people from 5 continents, 11 time zones working over the summer, helping put that together. And one of our project managers was an attorney in South Africa who had just fortuitously before the pandemic decided to take a year off to sort of explore legal tech stuff, and was able then to get a job with an international firm working on that's very much works with the open source tooling that we use, which is something called DocAssemble, which is actually was originally the basis of those 2 no-code tools that I shared in the chat. So it's really about just exposing people to the realm of the possible, getting their hands dirty. I like to do project work because I think that motivates things. I would love to see a day when I could do more like what Jeanette does and go into individual classes and say, here's a little something for each. And I think eventually that's where we go. But it doesn't mean that classes like the one I teach will go away, right? So we incorporate writing and literacy into all of our classes, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a legal writing course right. Or that we don't have things that help us hone those skills. And so, especially as it relates to things like bias and systems thinking and larger implications, I think there's still a role for that. So I do look forward to a day when we don't make that distinction between sort of should attorneys learn to code. It's really a question of what should they learn. And then the answer, I think, as we previewed in our earlier answers, is what's appropriate for whatever path they're taking. But they definitely need to know how the world works because that's the world they're going to be working in.
I want to address my experience within our university now. Of course, we have a lot of ambitions, but I must be real. A lot of ambitions are not not ready put into practice because we're working together with a lot of universities in the Netherlands, and especially for paralegals, the education of paralegals. so the University of Applied Sciences. And what we are doing in our curriculum is that we are trying to educate students to apply a decision tree. I don't know if it's the right word, a decision tree, but I think it's an English word, but I'm not sure. So they apply it to certain legal cases. And another thing we're doing into the curriculum is that we are trying to send the students also into the field, into the real world, and they're trying to address some real problems. I will give an example. We had some course that students were motivated to go into to contact with local businessmen, local people who had a business, a restaurant or something, or a shop or something, and they had to look for some legal problems which those people had. For instance, during the COVID period, a lot of shops were closed. There were several COVID measures, like in your countries, of course. And then the local businessmen were asking, how does it work? Is there a legal basis or something? So students went on with these questions, and they used different tools to address those questions, and also to make it transparent for them, and to make a sort of translation from legal knowledge to legal from the law, to make it very transparent for the local business owner, for the local restaurant. So you have to make a translation, and then it's of course legal design is interesting because then you can make a flow chart, you can make pictures, you can make different ways of make it accessible. Because access to law is very important for our university, to make it accessible to people who are not familiar with the law. Everybody should know the law in a country like ours or your country, but of course the practice is more difficult, and not everybody knows how to address the law, how to apply the law. So there's a sort of a translation, and the first experience from the students was that they were very happy to deal with real problems, and they it shifted their mindset that, oh, you can look at that way, and how you can help people to make it more transparent for them. So that's a way we're looking, exploring furthermore to incorporate it into our curriculum from day one, as they come into the university. And best thing would be that it would also have some attention before they come to the university, before their prior education. But still a long way to go. Also with colleagues, I don't know how it's in your countries, but a lot of colleagues are a bit reluctant, because it's a different way of teaching. It's not teaching, it's more coaching. So a lot of my fellow colleagues are used to teaching, so sending some information about the public law, about several law, specific law fields, but coaching is a different thing. And when they go into the streets, then you have to coach them more than you have to teach them. And that's a different way that's a different role of the teacher. I don't know how it's in your country, the difference of a teacher, but it's a dilemma for us.
Great, and that's my 3-minute warning. I sadly have a meeting that may be canceled. I'm going to be looking here to see if it is. I'll continue on for the next half hour, but if it's not, I'll have to leave in about 3 minutes. But that gives me 3 minutes to be able to talk about. Since I've taught in law schools in the past, but I don't currently teach in law schools. I'll take this question as what I wish I had learned and when I was going to law school. And one anecdote that Jeanette's story about, if I were good at math, I wouldn't be a lawyer, or I'm a lawyer because I was bad at math. It made me think of a story that a federal judge, a very powerful Article III judge in the United States, told the story about a 60-year-old lawyer litigating a trial in court. And during the trial, this 60-year-old lawyer was having trouble displaying a document for the jury, and was fumbling around, and then said something to the effect of, "Oh, if my 16-year-old were here, he could do this for me, ha, 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 ha." So this judge telling the story said, imagine going to a surgeon and the surgeon saying, "Oh, if my 16-year-old, he would know this all the blinky lights behind me, ha, 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 ha," right? The judge said, these are the tools of your trade. This is what you're using to do your job better. Don't pretend that this is something that you shouldn't need to know. You need to know it because this is the world we live in, is technology. So that's all a way of saying, what should we teach? We should teach people to not make those jokes. So I wish I had been taught design thinking, as Eric had mentioned and spoken about. That thinking around the problem in a way is really something beautiful, and it should be taught more. Also, I wish I'd been taught waterfall versus agile. The idea that lawyers are very waterfall thinking, that we need to be able, and for those who don't know, waterfall is you spend months specking out a problem and being able to figure out all the potential things that could happen. And then only after that months of prep work do you actually begin. That's contrasted with agile, where essentially if you want to build a car, you don't design a car. You first start with a skateboard that then turns into a bicycle, that then turns into a motorcycle, that then turns into a car. So you start with a skateboard and then you build out from there. That's the agile process. So I wish that I had been taught more agile, because that helps not only with software development projects and tech projects within a law firm, but also helps with legal work, right? So let's think about, you know, the small problems that we can bite out now and then build out to the larger. And then as far as if you didn't, like me, didn't have a Coding for Lawyers course, where do you learn? I learned a lot of coding from online. So Coursera was something that I used a lot. And sadly, apologies to Suffolk and the other universities represented here. But if I had David's tool when I was learning coding, I would have used David's Coding for Lawyers. But Coursera worked pretty well for me when at a time when I was at Thomson Reuters, I thought, boy, I really wish I'd known more about natural language processing, because then I could actually be able to work with my natural language processing experts in language that they understand to be able to better solve the problems. So I took a Coursera course on natural language processing, and I took a Coursera course on Python, because I knew that Python is a language that's often used in natural language processing. So at any rate, I could do that asynchronously, right? I could do it quickly. So things like Coursera, and then YouTube. Today, I spent a lot of time working with ontologies and being able to figure out taxonomies and ontologies. And so as I learned to think through and think like an ontologist and a computer programmer in the way that making computable taxonomies, ontologies, YouTube has been my best friend, because I've been able to figure out about the OWL infrastructure and RDMS and all of these ways to do it. So I would say, yeah, there are many tools, including the great universities represented here, to be able to get better up to speed.
I would just second some of what Damien said there. Absolutely. I would throw one more in. I send my students to Khan Academy and have them do the code hour that the big companies run. And yes, doing a frozen animation is not terribly exciting for a law student, but I kind of want it minimized from the perspective of I want them to know that even 8-year-old kids are doing this. I don't want them to feel the bar is too high. I want them to feel it's approachable. So I push them towards Khan for their first exposure.
So I do actually have a lesson where we teach them in Scratch, which is like a block coding language.
Yes.
For kids, and we tie that in with someone built a machine learning extension for Scratch, and so we use that in some of our. So yeah, I wholeheartedly.
Scratch is also.
And then I show them games my 7-year-old has made, and you know it's like you can do this.
Exactly. Your son did the bees and the flies, right? And
that was a joint project, our first co-design together.
My daughter did an iceberg that was shrinking as the temperature went up, and the polar bear had no place to go. So, you know, similar kinds of things. Scratch, Khan, they all teach them how to do these things in a way that's, and this is what I meant about information literacy, and this becoming part of their vernacular for the young people. So I think it's just the transition that we have to get through.
I can agree with that. Illiteracy is a big problem also in the Netherlands. If people cannot speak well or are digital not so savvy, so we have to make this translation. Also, if you're a legal professional, you have to make that translation, whether with visual, whether with more simple language. And often the lawyer always say, yeah, but simple language, the law isn't that simple, so it cannot be simple because I have been studying so long. But of course, I think that's nonsense.
Okay, guys, I think that it's time for the audience to open their microphones and share their point of views. My conclusion would be that we are in this transition period, luckily or unluckily enough, but this transition period means to us that we have to become very curious, like Damien has been. He has proven that now he knows how to code. So for all of us, we probably have to look into David's course and all the very interesting information that has been shared with a lot of generosity, showing us as well that collaboration and sharing is key to this change that of mindset that has to happen, that is starting to happen, because a lot of you are lawyers and this is happening, this sharing. But it is all of us who have to be sharing and all of us who have to be curious. And one last question that I have for David. David, you mentioned open source software for legal or legal tech open source. Is there a nice repository already organized with that or not yet? Because I know most of the tools you mentioned, but I don't know of any repository where they are collected and you can, beside GitHub, but like legal tech open source. Is there something like that?
Well, so I was specifically talking about DocAssemble, which is a framework that is made for doing document automation. And you do find a lot of law firms actually using it now. I just dropped that in the chat. So that's, and we actually have a bunch of repos that we've created using DocAssemble. The work we do for our COVID-19 response is all open source and on our GitHub page. So I'll include a link there. Yeah, we have DocAssemble fans in the in the chat. It really is amazing. It's almost it's a passion project of a legal aid attorney named Jonathan Pyle, and it's a wonderful community has built up around it, including many large companies that rest upon this work of this civic programmer who's just out there doing stuff to improve the world. And yeah, I can't say enough good things about Jonathan, the work he's done.
Okay, thank you. And now the room is yours. Please open your microphones. Whoever wants to speak, just raise the hand and puts the video on, and we will be very happy to hear you. Any questions? Any comments?
I see some hands. I don't know from who.
Yes. Mariel.
Hello, I want to ask something. Sorry. Yeah, so thank you all for sharing this insightful conversation. It was a pleasure to hear you and listen to you all. And well, my question is, I'm a legal designer, right? Which is a hybrid role. And I hardly believe that even though you are a lawyer, a former lawyer, you can develop and keep developing any kind of different skills, right? In my case, was designed, and also in some other cases could be leadership or marketing or programming, right? So what would be your best suggestion for all the former lawyers that wants to give it a chance to programming, right? Thanks.
I'll just say the open source community is a great place to get involved. So you can find people who are working on projects that you care about and that are already structured. There's a international organization you may know about called Legal Hackers. There are communities all over that. That would be a good place to start. Thinking of the audience, that's probably the first place I'd say. But you can find other similarly situated, civic-minded entities. In the States, we also have a sort of Code for America, which is it's a nonprofit here that, and you can find other echoes in other places. But a group of people who are already working on these things, usually on a volunteer basis, right? Some people volunteer by planting trees on the weekend. Some people volunteer by writing code. So I think that's a great place because oftentimes they want to work on oftentimes you'll see a lot of coders involved, in those communities, and they want to work on large projects that matter, but they don't have some set of the subject matter expertise that they need to help move that forward. So if you come in as a trained attorney with some of that subject matter expertise, you can learn to do the stuff that the new stuff you want to do while adding value from the stuff you had before.
Thank you.
I would add to that, David's really funny comment about some people plant trees and some people code. It reminds me of that there's a web show that I see frequently that's called The Indoor Kids. And I think that coders are generally the indoor kids. And so rather than going planting trees, and I think lawyers generally are indoor kids too. So I would say that in addition to that, there's lots of subject matter expertise obviously is something that coders need. Coders who want to, coders like lawyers often want to help the world. They're often very, why do you go to law school? I want to, change the world. Why do you become a coder? I want to make the world a better place, right? Those are variations on the same theme. So anyway, so put them both together and they can do cool things. And the organizations that David mentioned are really important, but the coders need lawyers to be able to do their work. So I would say, go to where the coders are.
Thank you all.
Okay, Maria Luisa, do you want to put the video on?
Yeah.
And the microphone on? Thank you.
It's working. Oh, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to congratulate, and from Malaga University, I'd like to congratulate everybody. This is a very interesting and key topic. I have a worry, and hearing some conversations, some piece of it, I'm still wondering about this problem of communication. Because for me, it's a keystone, it's core stone, because we are learning a lot recently about this agile method that is normally used in computer science, which is normal and it's getting more in business more and more, but we are not trained like this. If you do not create, I was wondering how are you overcoming this barrier? For me, it's a very important one. If you do not learn to think different, if you need to think different, I don't know, but at least try. You do not need to learn methodologically different. You wouldn't be able to overcome this. I mean, we always will run again in the same loop. Wouldn't be able to overcome this. So that's a huge, for me, it's a cornerstone. And so before everything, because you do not understand why you should think different in both sides, from a technological perspective and from a legal perspective, that you cannot even think in programming. So thank you very much, and congratulations. It was a very good talk.
Because maybe I can start the Agile versus a waterfall, I agree, is something that's important for business and for everyone else. And something that is that I'm currently working through, and I think will be a lifelong thing that I continue to work through, is to build the skateboard. You really don't need to worry as much about the car, but still you don't want to paint yourself into a corner that essentially makes the car impossible. So in that way, you want to build the skateboard in a way that you can eventually build the car. And the tricky part for any coder or lawyer is to think about what is premature optimization and what is actually something that I need to worry about because the car won't work if we build the foundation this way. So anyway, there's that idea of premature optimization. Often I talk to my coders and I say, oh, if we build it this way, in 6 months from now, we're going to hate the fact that we built it this way. And the coders are like, no, we can change it in 6 months. That's fine. Don't prematurely optimize. Anyway, so that's a way knowing whether you're thinking too far ahead or whether you're actually building a foundation that will crumble beneath you is something that you should worry about in coding and also worry about in law.
Maria Luisa, may I say something? Excuse me, David. No. Well, okay, let me just say something to Maria Luisa. Maria Luisa, my experience with these methodologies, I am a practicer, a very frequent practicer of legal design, and I like it very much. But I have to tell you something. This is not so much about learning. It's very much about doing. So you can maybe attend one course, but then what you have to do is try until you understand that. Like yesterday, for instance, I did some training with a group, a practical part, because I did the theoretical part before. And the first thing I asked the students was like, okay, what do you think about my course? It was a video course, you know? I knew that it was not a good course because design thinking, you don't learn it, you do it. And then you, let's say, understand it, and then you practice it. And you're not an expert, you're a facilitator. And people who haven't practiced it do say very often, I'm an expert, and they say, I know how to do it, but you never learn it because every time is different because it's experiential. This is what I think. Yeah, I don't know if Damian or the others believe that, and I guess that with Agile and probably the other methodologies is exactly the same. So my advice: do you want Malaga students to change their mindset? Then organize events like hackathons to solve the challenges of the city of Malaga, or organize a datathon, or organize, I don't know, a sprint or whatever, but do things like what they were saying, like try to get DocAssemble and create a solution for the city, I don't know, or for a community which is in risk. But that's what I would do, and what I think we all have to do is do things, do them wrong, and then try again, you know. And of course, if we can do them with computer science people or scientists, data scientists, or with sociologists beside us, then the product will have much more chances to be successful, and we will change our mindset without even noticing. That's my personal experience. You wanted to say something, David. Maybe you want to jump in, or
I've talked enough.
Any?
I'll just say here.
Other? Yeah. Any other question or any other reflection? We are already on time, so if no questions, if nothing is left here, we will do a summary of this in an infographic. We will try to use design visual thinking to reflect the conclusions and what we have learned. So my colleagues which are here listening to us, Ebru, Berg, Daniel, Amalia, thank you all for being there, for helping Ilsa to get these webinars every time. Thank you, Janet, for your time, David, Damian, and Eric. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for your generosity. We have not only heard incredible things, but also got a lot of information that I'm sure is going to be very helpful to everyone. We will guide you soon, and we will invite you all to be part of this hackathon. So maybe Malaga University want to enroll, maybe Janet, David, you can invite your students, and we can have a team from different countries and trying to solve the difficult challenges that we are going through at this moment in the world. Thank you all. Let me take a picture.
Thank you.
Thanks,
oh yes, yeah, we gotta do it.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very, very much. My
Bye,
pleasure.
everyone.
Take care.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Bye-bye.